Hello, everyone. Welcome to the other side of cyber. I am James Azar.
Hey, peeps and geeks, JJ here from the other side of the world, on the other side of cyber.
On the other side of cyber, the Untold stories. We've got an awesome show for you guys today. Before we get started, though, if this is your first time tuning in, make sure to subscribe and subscribe to our YouTube channel found on the other side of cyber. Although this is broadcasting now on the Cyber Hub podcast channel, that won't be for too long. We are going to be moving to the other side of cyber very soon. So if you love the show, make sure to subscribe there. The show is all about you, so you can comment and go live. The show's format is 30 minutes. We talk about our topic, and then we go into a Q&A session. So make sure to comment. We see all comments and are able to respond to them simultaneously throughout the show. JJ, how are you this wonderful, magnificent, lovely week after Valentine's Day?
I know. Well, it's very warm here in Radelaide, which is what we call Adelaide, on the other side of the world in lovely Australia. And I think it's 37 degrees here today. So it is over 100 degrees in your world. So it is very warm.
In our world, in Atlanta, Georgia, it is below freezing today.
Wow. So we're literally on the other side of the weather as well as the other side of cyber.
Correct. Like I went for a walk today, and I typically can walk like 40, 45 minutes easily. Yeah, it was 20 minutes and come back home.
So wouldn't that be great if we could just swap in an instant? And you go outside here and I go outside there to cool down. You're here to warm up, and then we can come back to our homes.
Teleportation is a thing.
It would be so good. Although I must admit, I'm a little bit, I'm not going to say concerned, because it's not a concern. It is in shock by our topic today, James. So for our viewers, for our listeners, James has decided, because we take it in turns each week, to what we're going to talk about for the other side of cyber. And this week, we're talking about human trafficking. Now, I thought, it doesn't happen in Australia. Well, I was wrong. And it is a fascinating, overwhelming, and tough topic to talk about. There is no two ways about it. So, James, I'm very interested to see and hear about why you decided to go with this one and what are some things that you've found. And remember, please, guys, ask questions today. We are here to talk for 30 minutes at least on our topic to make sure that we can really nut out what is the other side of cyber when it comes to human trafficking, which for this one is that human element. And then after that, we will finish up the podcast, so to speak, and then move into a open forum to really have a look at your comments and questions. So, James, over to you.
So, yeah, thank you, JJ, and I'm so happy to be doing the show with you today. I love this. I look forward to Tuesdays and Wednesdays when I do the other side of cyber in Tech Town Square. Those are like, like I sit all day and I'm like, all right, let's get into some really cool topics that are beyond vulnerability management, patching, and all that other stuff, which I love and do daily. But tonight we're going to talk about something that's a lot more serious. I think it's something that's happening. And I feel like people are looking for causes now.
Ooh, okay.
And I was all like, well, let's address a cause that we can all help eliminate. Literally, we can put an end to it if we wanted to.
Wow, big call.
Human trafficking.
Yeah.
Human trafficking. And so it's human trafficking to me is extremely, I don't want to say just fascinating, but it hits close to home. So a lot of people who listen and know I've traveled the world. The globe that sits to right above my left shoulder has over 100 little dots on it from over 100 countries that I've been to and 6 continents. And I've seen and been on flights where I've seen human traffickers. And it's disturbing. It's troubling. And one of the reasons I brought it up too was I've avoided Twitter now for a decent month.
Yep.
Which has been great. My life has never been better. Thank you. But then I'm going on Twitter and I'm watching these people argue about some of this like really foolish things. And I'm like, let me give you something really important to argue about. How do we combat and stop human trafficking? Because it's not something that's going away. It's a steady business. Human trafficking not only involves modern day slavery, it involves prostitution. There's a lot of different aspects to human trafficking that is very disturbing. And so, one of the groups I work with here in Georgia, we address a lot of human trafficking. We look at it significantly. We in the part of Georgia I live in, north of Atlanta, we have a serious problem of human trafficking here. A serious problem of human trafficking where I live in a very posh, comfortable suburb of Atlanta, Georgia.
How do you find out though? How do you know?
So one, I think most people turn a blind eye to it. They're too busy doing their own things. They're not really paying attention. I talk a lot to law enforcement, and one of the conversations with law enforcement here was around what they call the golden triangle up here, and then what they call the perfect square south of Atlanta.
Yep.
And Georgia happens to be the number 3 state in America with human trafficking issues, behind only New York and California.
Okay. Wow.
And so it's time we talk about it. It's time we bring it out, because guess what? These people are trafficked thanks to technology.
So how do they actually, that's the interesting thing. I always knew that technology was involved, but I really didn't understand the extent of it. So can you give our watchers and our listeners an idea of how technology is actually used when it comes to trafficking humans?
So there's several types of trafficking, and I want to talk about that a little bit more in detail, okay? Because all of them use the internet, all of them use different aspects of the internet, but they all target people differently. So in America, human trafficking is predominantly done on teenagers, meaning ages 11 to about 20, predominantly.
Okay.
Saying that that is a fairly large percentage. In Eastern Europe, human trafficking is done from 15 to around 30.
Okay.
In Asia, it's from 6 to 35.
Wow.
That's Asia. Australia has a similar problem like the States. It's predominantly between 11 to 18, 20, 19, 20 or so that they get into, and they're most vulnerable to trafficking. That's the core of it. So now that I've addressed that, and it's very regional, and we are on the other side of cyber, so I'm going to keep this very global, okay? Human trafficking isn't one directional. It's a multi-directional trade that generates, I think, over $400 or $500 billion a year for the people that deal with it internally.
Wow.
Right? So people who are the coyotes, who essentially take people from poorer countries to greater places, or people like the photographers that take women from one place to another with a specific promise, and then that promise doesn't happen. For those tuning in,
like the modeling
live,
things?
I just for those tuning in, watching us live, guys, folks, gang, hello, welcome. You can comment, you can subscribe. We're talking about human trafficking. All your questions. This isn't an easy topic, but we can't just talk about easy things. We can't do it. We have to be able to talk about some really serious stuff. And so most trafficking is done online through social media networks: Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok. Those are predominantly the means by which human trafficking is initiated. Those means themselves generate a pipeline of candidates, of people who are either sexually exploited online, meaning they never leave their home, they don't get out of their house, but they're
Yeah.
sexually exploited online, to others who actually reach a position where and reach a stage within the virtual relationship that becomes in person, and then that in person leads to a crisis. That crisis leads to that person being trafficked. In the US, we see people being trafficked from one state to another, and in some cases, in Georgia here, for example, in November, there was a joint task force where they found 60 children who were being trafficked in Georgia that were all pretty much from the state and neighboring states, meaning I think 20 out of the 60 were actual people, kids that were missing from Georgia that were just in this one part of the state.
Jeez.
So we see that quite often. And this is where, last week we talked about the digital lives of our teens, right? Of Aussie teens. And you brought up some great statistics. And if you missed last week's episode, you should go back and listen to it. It's kind of a precursor to today's episode, which is if parents don't know what their kids are doing on social media, chances are your kids could be susceptible to either online sexual exploitation and or being victims of trafficking.
Yep. I think people have a misconception, and I know I did, I'm going to be honest. I knew that there was this going on, and I know that it happens, but I've never looked at the numbers, I've never looked at the details and the research. And I think most people that are listening now, that are watching or are listening to us after, there's this image of people in a van being trafficked over a border to be utilized for whatever reason, whether it be work, whether it be slavery, whether it be sexual reasons, whatever it is, being sold for whatever purpose. Now, that may be what it used to be like, but now, like you said, James, this can actually occur with people not physically leaving their homes. So especially kids. So it's this human trafficking. I wonder if we need to change or add a little bit of wording to it for people, because there's a misconception. Because I know that if I'm thinking something, someone else is going to be thinking it. So the actual elements behind it, like the description of it, like when you say cybersecurity, that's a massive bowl of information right there. Human trafficking, same thing. And I didn't realize what it was like here in Australia. And you're saying it happens in your backyard as well. So how do we bring this to an element that people understand this is happening everywhere? Could be even in a kid's bedroom, all the way to, international borders or domestic borders where people are being physically trafficked.
So here we come as cybersecurity professionals having this conversation, right? And we're in the midst of what I consider to be a very challenging time. COVID has increased human trafficking significantly, not by a little bit, significantly. These numbers are not out yet, but there are more kids missing now than ever.
Because of COVID?
Well, they can't go anywhere. They're trapped at home with their families. They're online all day long.
Good point.
When kids went to school, there was a period of time when they were in school where they were with their friends, and the warning signs were available. Teachers were there, friends were there. Someone would say something about your child, and you would be able to address it.
Yep.
That's not the case now. Kids are all day long in their rooms, all day long somewhere on some device, talking to God knows who.
Yeah.
Most parents are so busy trying to work, they don't have time. It's a tough job to be a parent in today's age.
Oh, yeah. It definitely is.
Right? And they're going through this challenge of sorts, trying to identify how these kids are being taken. And now they're being taken. You brought up, as we were doing show prep, you brought up that perfect slide of kind of, when kids say, I'm grown, I'm 15, or I'm 16, or I'm 17, or whatever the case may be.
Yep.
Well, yeah, you're kind of grown, but you're not really grown. Like, you're still kind of stupid, right? Like, your brain isn't fully developed.
But
And
he's still a
so,
kid. He's still a kid.
right, but the internet has made kids grow up fast. And because the internet made kids grow up fast, they're more susceptible to human trafficking. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. Here's what happened. These traffickers, this is an organized criminal organization that does this. These are gangs. They make money from this. They're not trafficking anyone just for the sake of trafficking them. They're trafficking them because they do one of two, three different things that they do with trafficked children. Predominantly, it's sexual trafficking, meaning they get a child to run away. That child then goes to a very, very bad environment that's filled with alcohol, drugs, and then they get drunk, they get on drugs, they get hooked, they're in sex trafficking at that point, and they're in prostitution. The other aspect of it, of human trafficking, is the modern slavery. So modern slavery we see it predominantly in Asia and in Eastern Europe. We also see it a lot in South and Central America, including Mexico. So people will put ads locally, either through social media, like a WhatsApp or Telegram, Facebook, you name it, saying it's a job to go be a cleaner somewhere, or take care of someone, or something of that nature. And it's a job that pays very well, double or triple or even quadruple what you would earn working at home.
Yeah.
And you're in your late teens, early 20s. You're very attractive. You fit a bill that they're looking for, and they hire you to do the job. You get into the nation country. They take all your documentation away from you. They stick you and lock you in a house, and now you're being trafficked in that specific place. These people are harder to find because the way they build confidence with the targets and the way they bring the targets through is it's very, very articulate. On every flight, there's always a few people who are watching them, who are part of it. We've seen it with kids. I was getting briefed on a situation where there was a lady on a flight with 3 minors, but the 3 minors didn't look alike. And so the flight attendants, so a lot of airlines train their flight attendants on human trafficking, how to recognize signs of human trafficking. They'll write a note in someone's food, and they'll be like, if you need any help, just, like, when you give me back the tray, turn the cup upside down, or something like that. Like something that the person who's trafficking them would not notice. And this airline flight attendant, who was very good at her job, noticed that none of the 3 kids looked anything alike. Their age ranges were too similar to be brother and sister, and the lady's story didn't add up. So she notified the captain. And then when the lady went to sleep and one of the kids was awake, she grabbed the kid and said, would you like a piece of chocolate? And the kid said, sure. And the kid got up and followed her to the galley, and she asked the kid a few questions, realized that the kids were being trafficked, notified the captain. When the plane landed at its destination, before anyone could deplane, customs came on board and apprehended the suspect, took the 3 kids, and she was trafficking 3 minors. They couldn't have been older than 9 or 10 years old.
And the thing is, a female trafficking kids, we don't think like that as a general rule. We're very trusting, and if a woman is with kids, we wouldn't really look at it. And I do hope that after listening to this show today, people will have a little bit more of awareness of what can actually go on. And if, the old saying, if you see something, say something. I think the thing that concerns me the most with the human trafficking, James, is when we look at the cyber aspect and the human element, the trafficking doesn't necessarily need to be physical. So if you've got kids, like you say, in their room on whatever social media platform they're on, so there's that physical element of trafficking, and then there's the I suppose, the using of their images, that exploitation. So there's that crossover between the trafficking, the slavery, and the human exploitation. They sort of tend to mold into one now with the bringing of online. So how do we, as parents, as people, just people contributing to the world, what kind of conversations and what kind of things can we actually say to our kids in relation to this, or to other humans?
The one thing is to ask questions. So a lot of people are always afraid to ask their kid questions. Who are you talking to online? You know, I said it last week, your kids have no right for privacy. I don't care what people say, your kid, zero right for privacy.
I agree.
Take their privacy. They don't need it. They earn it. Don't give it to them. Number one. Number two, set time limits on apps. Don't let your kid spend 5 hours on Snapchat. It's probably not healthy for your kid on a lot of different ways. Your kid shouldn't be on Instagram that often. By the way, like Omegle and Chat Roulette, those are prime places where human traffickers target victims.
I'm going to share this screen now. It could be a challenge, but we're going to have a look. I'm going
to remove this comment. So let's talk a little bit about this third aspect of it, which I talked a little bit about, modern slavery. And then there's kind of the new aspect of slavery, not just human exploitation and human trafficking, but also modern day slavery. So these people, we see this predominantly in the Gulf nations. We also see it in parts of Southeast Asia, and we see it in parts of China, where these people are essentially taken to a country and they become domestic workers.
It's happening here too, James.
But yeah, I mean, it happens everywhere. But the numbers in the U.S. and Australia are lower, and they're decreasing simply because of the risk of it. Whereas in Asia and in Gulf nations, it's only increasing because they've made it almost legal. It's almost like socially acceptable. And that's the dangers of socially acceptable norms, right? Yeah. And then these people are taken into a place, and when they're taken into a place, they're put to work there and nothing else. So here's somehow online grooming things go, and JJ, credit to you for finding this.
It's pretty scary.
Well, if you look at those emotions, if you scroll all the way down and we list all of those emotions, think of like how many of us have felt that right now?
Yeah. Well, if you think about kids, youth, like you said, 11 to 21, even to 22, just because you turn 18 or 21, the legal age, whichever country you're in, doesn't mean you're an adult. You still have a lot to learn at that age. And when we think about kids and we think about that connection, and we have a look, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth one down. So connection. So the core message from the youth is, I don't have any friends or family who care, or I've got no one to connect to. And what that might look like online, she's not my true friend. If you're not going to support me, unfriend me, I don't need you anymore. So kids are reading this type of thing from their friends. And then the trafficker, the criminal, I don't like even to call them trafficker, their strategic response would be, I'll be your friend. And then they know that that is that core human need that they will work on, and they will go above and beyond to prove that connection, which gains the trust quickly from a young person, because they haven't had the life experience yet, have they, to really understand, hold on a minute, this is not really real, this can't be happening. So it's scary if you think about all those things. And this is not a quick fix. These things take a bit of time, from the criminal to the target for whatever their desire would be. But these type of things are the basic human elements that we all need, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if anyone wants to research that. We all have a need for these things, and it's no different no matter what age you are. It's pretty scary.
they take advantage of kids in these situations. I think when you look at the grooming and the trust online, that's very easy to acquire. I think the scary part is how they talk these kids and women and young men into meeting them, kind of taking the virtual relationship into the physical. And one of the things that they do that's very common is, as they're building trust, they'll acquire information on the target through pictures, through sexually explicit and sexually charged conversations, and then threaten to use them if the victim doesn't comply with what they ask for. So
Wow.
we see that in child pornography. When you look at the younger age of human trafficking, so we talk from newborn to about 8 years old, right? Those are predominantly kidnappings. And by the way, folks, they're very rarely, at least in the Western world, they're very rarely done outside the circle of influence, meaning it's predominantly the circle of influence of that family. So it's someone you know that's taking your kid. It's a neighbor. It's someone who's a friend of a neighbor, a family member of a neighbor, a distant cousin, a trusted coworker, a babysitter. They tend to do this, and they move around. So to me, a red flag for a lot of parents here is the new friendly person who comes into town who's awesome with kids, and they don't have any, but they're awesome. They're like almost too good with kids. Red flag. I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm saying
No.
red flag.
And like anything, this comes down to awareness. This comes down to having conversations, being aware, and paying attention of what's going on. I think one of the worst statistics that I read, and I'm aware of time, we're coming close to the end of our podcast element of our show today. And remember, folks, that we do continue this for another 30 minutes where we talk about some more research that we've found and take it to different areas with your comments and questions that you might have. But I found the most scary thing is a lot of these trafficked victims are now newborn babies because they're being born into the world of human trafficking. So the parents or the mothers who are carrying these babies are already in it. They've already been trafficked in one way, shape, or form, and now they're having babies within this world. And I thought that was just horrific, that would even occur. So these poor little babies don't even know any different. They're born into this world. And this graph here shows the age of victims when we're looking at registered trafficking victims. The average age is 27. Now, I think most people would have thought, yeah, young kids. No, because a lot of it's for work, a lot of it's for the different elements. We don't necessarily put everybody in the same basket and say it's only for children, because people also, sadly, buy children. They don't have them, so they actually buy them. So there's a market for that goes on. It's, I found the whole thing really quite strange, James, to be honest.
Yeah, it's not only strange. So when you look at 27-year-old being the average age, I think it's really important to note that the average age of 27 is predominantly sexual trafficking.
Yep.
It's prostitution. The numbers don't lie in that. These are people who are typically, these are young women who come from a very poor upbringing, who are offered an opportunity to go travel the world. And in the world of Facebook, right, here's one very clever thing some of these traffickers do. And then we're going to end the podcast version and we'll stay for live. But here's one very interesting thing that they do. They create profiles of other people who work with the company, who do similar roles in the company. And they send these Instagram profiles or Snapchat profiles to these people who and they're uploading stories like, here I am in Dubai sitting at the pool of my very expensive hotel in my very expensive, Gucci bikini with my very expensive Jimmy Choo shoes, and I'm hanging out. And I think that's such a huge deal of how they convince these 27-year-old women, anywhere from 22 to 35 to go to those places because they're offering them some sort of glamour that doesn't exist from where they come. So that's it for our audio version of the podcast. We're going to say bye to our audio listeners. If you're watching us live or sticking around, we're going to do a bunch of Q&A now. So now we'll open up the comments section so you guys can actually comment below. If you're watching us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, you can comment with questions or experiences or things that you've seen or you're concerned about, and we'll address those here in the Q&A. For those listening on your favorite podcast listening platform, you can go to our YouTube channel and watch the rest of this podcast. JJ, sign us away for those audio listeners.
Thank you, our audio listeners. You are awesome people. We look forward to next week, and stay tuned for the rest of us. And please stay safe online.
All right, so let's kind of get into this whole idea of what they do with these, I want to say, not fake profiles, but how they bring in handlers. Just so you know, women who are born into this or are groomed from a very young age, meaning they are taken at 11, they go through 6-7 years of hell, and then they stay in that hell for 20, 30, 40 more years, and they recruit others.
Yeah, and it's a perpetual cycle. It's a
never-ending
It's very
cycle.
akin to the drug world is at the same time. We're not going to go into that right now, but it's that same thing. If you're born into it, you don't know any different, so you follow that path. You don't know the right from wrong. You just do it because that's your life.
Right. And so we see that here, folks, where the means of control, and I can't see the side. It's a bit blurry. I'm sure it is for some of our viewers as well. I don't know if you're able to zoom in just slightly
I will zoom in on, let me see, bear with me, people. I know this visually is probably not the best. Oh, we're at 500%. JJ took it a bit far.
Up one more higher. There we go.
Oh, what the heck?
You jumped to 500 again. That's your new laptop. That's what you get, Dolphins. All right.
Well, hey, touch wood, we've been good.
Yes, indeed. So means of control that is used on adults is predominantly the restricted of movement, psychological abuse, false promises, threats, not leaving them with money, which, by the way, taking passports, eliminating persons' freedom of travel. I remember a while ago, I was traveling in a Gulf nation, which I'll keep unnamed, and we ran into a case where there was a person who was in a coffee shop and they were asking for help because all of their documents were taken by their employer, but they were trying to leave the country. And the local embassy of their nation couldn't help them because they had no documents. So think how bad that is. You're in a place you don't want to be. You have people holding you that you don't want to hold. And no one will lift a finger to help you get out of the situation.
Jeez. Well, when I look at these side by side, I'm just seeing where there's any major differences. And sadly, for the children's side, for means of control, sexual abuse higher than for adults. But we're both sides, psychological abuse, restricted movements are pretty much standard there, and false promises and threats. I mean, these are the things that if you reverse it, like if you take the flip side of this and say, okay, if these are the means of control for taking earnings, what could these human traffickers, criminals, be doing? What activities are they doing? What words are they saying to entrap or manipulate someone into that situation? Because I always like to think, okay, what's the flip side? If it comes down to restricting of movement, then that's pretty much locking them in a place or instilling so much fear that they know they can't leave a certain area. So for the moment when we're in the COVID restrictions, I found it very interesting, as you mentioned before, James, that COVID has actually increased human trafficking. I would have thought there would be a decrease.
So no, the movement of travel still, even though there are international restrictions, the national domestic demand has increased. So, it's extremely fascinating when you hear that, because that's one of the biggest challenges around human trafficking is a lot of it is local. I think like the percentage I saw from the US Department of Justice was 46% of human trafficking in the US is local, meaning a person is taken from one part of the state, and sometimes they're staying in the same city, they're just on a different side of the city.
Yep.
But they're locked in. So something very interesting. Here's another tip. So if you're concerned about human trafficking, human traffickers operate in a specific way. So one, they never let their victims go out when it's busy.
Okay.
So you'll rarely see someone who's being humanly trafficked at the supermarket at 6 p.m. when everyone's at the supermarket. You're likely going to see them there at 11 p.m. or 10 p.m. or very early in the morning, because that's where you're going to see it predominantly.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you see that in the supermarket and you see the person and they're not holding eye contact, they're with several handlers, they're being very cautious, maybe they're not really buying the things that they want. The victims of human trafficking tend to exhibit significant psychological signs to what's going on. And so when you notice that, there's nothing wrong with calling law enforcement. Shulam, what is happening? Shulam Keller, shalom, shalom. Kol hakavod means well done in Hebrew.
No, I've learned a new word.
Yeah, kol hakavod.
Kol
Shulam here comments that kol hakavod to you for bringing visibility to this important topic in the field. We need to be hearing more about this from thought leaders like JJ and taking the appropriate counteroffensive actions. Yeah, this is one of those where this requires a multitude of actions, right? So you have to look at it from like this, right? It's got to be, one aspect is we have to address the online factor, and we have to be more involved in our kids in the online world. Yep. And understanding who they speak with. And we talked about that last week. I'll say it again, and I'll keep saying it every single week. The second part is we have to be aware of our environment. We
do. Get our heads out of our phones when we're out and actually look around and see what's going on.
Watch people. So I'll give you a prime example. I was flying somewhere a few years ago, and I was sitting at the front of the plane, but I walked to the back of the plane. I needed to stretch my legs. And I noticed something that didn't seem right. I noticed two very young women, couldn't be older than 16 years old, with a very older man. And he was very sketchy. And I pointed it out to the flight attendant. And the flight attendant said, yeah, that does seem sketchy. So When one of the girls went to the restroom, they ambushed her.
In a nice way, of course.
Yes. The flight attendants were like, "Oh, what are you guys planning on doing?" So there's questions you can ask them, right? Like, you know, if you're flying to Sydney, well, where are you going to be staying in Sydney? And if they say, "I don't know, we're staying at a friend's," well, where does your friend stay in Sydney? What part of the city? Well, I don't know. All right. Sign number one, something is very wrong with that picture.
Yep.
Same thing when you see someone in the supermarket and you think they're troubled, and if you just want to identify it, hey, how's it going? Right? Like, do you know if this peanut butter is really good or really bad? Whatever aisle you're in, just start a conversation about a product that's on the shelf. And ask them, "Oh, I've never seen you here before. I always shop at this hour. Where do you live? How long you been in town for?" And if you get very blank stares, very blank answers, realize you're probably dealing with a victim of human trafficking. And you can always say, like, "Do you need any help? Is everything okay?" And if they get really concerned around their handlers of having a conversation with you, they get really weirded out. Tattletale sign, call 911, get a clear description, take a picture with your phone without being noticed.
And that's dial 000 here in Australia. We don't do
that's 000 in Australia. In the US, just so you know, they have a text line set up as well, and they have a hotline that you can report this stuff to.
James, I found this interesting bit of information
Let's
on one of our Australian Federal Police site here about the signs a person may be a victim of trafficking. So, and I think what you just said, and that's why I thought I'd bring this up, because I've never thought about it to think when I'm out to add in the fact of, let's just pay attention to what's going on out there. So the person appears to be servicing a large debt to their employer or a third party, so someone in financial difficulties. If you can have a conversation without prying too much, you can have it. They don't have their passport, identity documents that they would need. What have we got? They don't have a contract for work. That's a big one here in Australia. I'm sure that is everywhere else as well. They're unable to leave their job, so they feel very trapped. It's another good one to have a conversation about. They're subject to different or less favourable working conditions. We see this often when people are working ridiculous hours and not getting paid very much. They never or rarely leave their accommodation for non-work reasons. That's a good one. They're living where they work. They're being controlled by their employer. They have little or no money. Physical injuries to have a look for. Always in the presence of their employer. Like you said, James, like the handlers, people are always around them. They work excessively long hours and have few, if any, days off. And when looking at all of these, to James's point, this is up to us as a community to make observations and start those random, seemingly random conversations, because you're not going to know a lot of this unless you ask the question. You can't make an assumption about anything. So, I mean, look,
like,
this
I'll always ask. So one of the things that's really weird, by the way, but it comes off better from a woman than a man, unfortunately, in a lot of these cases, is asking them for their social media. Like, "Hey, are you on Instagram?" And if they tell you, "No, I'm not," and you're like, "How are you not on Instagram?" Right? You're like at the age to be on Instagram.
Yeah.
Right? Again, there's a bunch of tattletale signs to this kind of stuff that are really critical. Now, let's go into the cyber aspect here as we kind of hit the top end of the show.
Yes.
Is we as cybersecurity people, privacy folks, information security folks, we have a responsibility to do good with what we know. You know, Ross Young, the CISO over at Caterpillar, I know Patrick Benoit and a bunch of others, there's this conversation around cybersecurity people taking an oath.
Oh, did you see my thing I put up about the oath?
I did not. I missed it.
Oh, I put up a poll on LinkedIn to see what people thought of the cybersecurity oath. That's interesting.
So, yeah, and I think I brought yours up last week when we talked about it. I think I brought
where
it up on the town square last week.
you go. I'll find my results because they've just come in.
So there's the idea of taking an oath, and in that oath, whether you take it or not, it's our role to help defend the people who are less able to defend themselves. And online scams are a really big deal, and a lot of times the way an online human trafficking is a very big deal, and a lot of times it's almost left for a rare 60-minute story because of a death, an overdose, someone who knew someone who shared the story that made some headlines.
Yep.
Or it's covered by local news and it's very underfunded. It's a 2-minute segment and it's towards the end of the news broadcast when everyone's already like half asleep on it. And so Shulam is asking for the link. We will share it on the back end of this.
Oh, there's my poll.
So what does your poll results show?
All right. So my post read something. So cyber professionals, it's time we have a hashtag cyber oath. Something that encapsulates the intent to share our knowledge, hints or tips to stay safe online for the people. So cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility, and we have a duty of care to help educate everyone who's online. Everyone else who's on the internet, your votes and ideas are also needed. Keeping you safe online is often seen as a job for the geeks or the companies who create the apps we use, and this isn't the case. If you're online, it's your responsibility to know how to stay safe, and that's not easy. That's why we're here, James. So how can we in the cyber community help you? What should our cyber oath be? And the 4 options I put, well, 3 actually, was 1, and remember, the doctors take the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm. So I went with that in my brain to say, okay, something that's easy to say, something that we don't have to be complexed, but to do no harm makes logical sense for a doctor. So I put 3 options out. 1, create human firewalls. 2, share cyber tips. 3, have cyber conversations. And the 4th one was whatever you want to say that I haven't mentioned. And 35% of people voted to create human firewalls. Now, whether that be right or wrong, I think it's a conversation we need to have, James, to have a cyber oath that we do as cyber professionals take as our job to educate others, whether it be through a podcast, whether it be through links and hints and tips on social media, conversations with people we know, whatever it is. I think we have a duty of care to always, every day at least, do something to help protect the people that are actually on the interwebs, because it's scary.
So let's talk about a few organizations that are doing some really important work here. The Global Alliance Against Trafficking in Women. By the way, we didn't talk a lot about Africa, but Africa is human trafficking in Africa is beyond crisis. Stop the Traffic without the C. It's TRAFFIK. The Urban Justice Center's Sex Workers Project. A lot of this stuff actually takes case of in New York, we see a predominant human trafficking with sex workers from Africa and South America, Latin America, and so forth. Fair Girls as well. That's another organization. UNICEF, that's a global organization, obviously part of the UN mission.
World Vision do a whole lot of work there as well.
Yeah, and then Freedom Network USA.
We'll put together some links for people to have a look at. And there's also a number that you can report at the National Security Hotline here in Australia. And their quote is, if it doesn't add up, speak up, which is 1-800-123-400. 1-800-123-400. Sad that we even have to have this conversation, James, but this is
we need to have more of it.
We've got the other side of cyber for that very reason. This is not just about what happens after a company gets breached. This is about the real human element of cybersecurity, those untold stories that don't seem to have enough education elements out there. They might get the headlines, but they're certainly not getting enough conversation.
Yeah, so
there's so much info.
like
Wow.
so doctors take the Hippocratic Oath. How about, so I'm looking at this and create human firewalls. I honestly think that there needs to be greater cooperation and a greater ecosystem to help address this stuff, where when we recognize that there's a profile that's doing human trafficking, that we report it, that we're able to get it taken down quickly, that we're able to mobilize support to the victim.
Yep. But I think, like lots of things in cyber, and some of the comments on my poll when I did open it up on LinkedIn, a lot of the comments, how do you put it? It's really hard to just narrow it down to some easy words that covers everything. So do no harm. If you think about the doctors and do no harm, that is the overarching thing of everything they do. For us as cyber professionals, we have our jobs and whatever that might be, CISOs, education for cyber, pen testers, hackers that are, the good hackers, blue teams, red teams, purple teams, green teams, all the hats under the sun. Now we think about what words could we use. Maybe that's something that we'd work on together over the coming months, James, is having a look at that cyber oath, because I believe it's what brings us together as a cyber community. And it's something we don't have. We're getting a lot better at it, but something that will overarch everyone in the cybersecurity, information security field, that they take the cyber oath, that could have a paragraph underneath it of what that means. I actually really like the have cyber conversations. It's something to do about collaboration or conversations or something. I don't know. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff. Shulam will have all the links available in the show notes here on YouTube. And then I'll post them in the comments, and JJ will post them in the comment section on the LinkedIn video as well. So you can see that, and we'll tag you in some of those links. We have a long road ahead of us to combat this thing.
Yeah, we do.
But we need to talk about it more. And we really need to address it. And my hope is that people won't just talk about it. People always tell me, like, we should go to the government. And I'm like, that's where things don't get done. That's where someone's going to use this as a way to try to get money throw money at a problem that needs more than money, right? It needs people with a good moral compass to want to do the right thing. And that involves social media networks actually doing the right thing and blocking these profiles and letting their security team really go to town to locking the people who log in out from ever being able to establish another profile. Because here's the thing, guys. You take one profile down, another one comes right back up.
No, that's the sad thing. I've actually made a note, because I think it's important we come back to this in a few months, James, because there's probably some really good and further information that we can share with our listeners and our supporters on this topic. Some other things that we could do in our communities to have more conversations about this.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're looking for anywhere to donate time or resources, look at any of the organizations we've mentioned. Look up, just go to DuckDuckGo, search organizations fighting human trafficking, and use them. Reach out to them and see what kind of support they need. A lot of them are underfunded. Only when it's Human Trafficking Awareness Month or week that people pay attention to it. And then the rest of the time, they're busy paying attention to something else. But here, doing work it's like giving someone a job. It changes lives. Well, making sure that someone doesn't fall victim to human trafficking is also changing lives. So we have to do our part. JJ, sign us off.
Excellent. Thank you so much, James. And thank you for everyone who stayed on board for our live segment here. We do look forward to next week. I've got a few options for next week, but I'm going to keep them and put them out on social because I'm not 100% sure which way I want to go. So it has been fantastic to talk with you all. Please remember to subscribe to The Other Side of Cyber here on YouTube and on LinkedIn, and also through the Cyber Hub podcast group, and follow us on everything that you possibly can. Smash to subscribe. Don't miss us. We look forward to being with you guys next week. I'm JJ. Stay safe online.
All right, guys, stay cyber safe.